Have you ever felt like a display product? No longer just a person with a story, wounds, desires, contradictions, but something to be shown, to be made appealing, to be updated, to be compared with other similar products. Something that has to grab attention in a few seconds before the gaze moves on. We live in a society that keeps telling us we are free, free to choose, free to buy, free to change jobs, partners, cities, identities, appearances. And yet, behind this apparent freedom, many of us feel a pressure that is hard to name. The feeling of having to be desirable all the time, always high-performing, always interesting, always ready to prove something, as if our existence had become a storefront and we were there on the shelves, waiting for someone to choose us. Maybe the problem is not just that we consume objects. Maybe the problem is that we've learned to look at ourselves with the same gaze we use to look at objects. We evaluate ourselves, we compare ourselves, we correct ourselves, we make ourselves more presentable. And at a certain point you start to wonder, are we still people who live, or products trying to stay competitive on the shelf? Zygmunt Bauman described our time with a simple and powerful image: liquidity. In liquid modernity, nothing seems destined to truly last anymore. Bonds loosen, identities change shape, work becomes unstable, relationships become fragile. Even the future stops being a promise and starts to look like a vague threat. Once, at least ideally, life seemed to be built on sturdier structures: a profession, a family, a community, a sense of belonging, a trajectory. They were not always fair structures. They were not always free. They were not always happy. They gave me a shape. Today, instead, shape has become temporary. We are asked to keep adapting constantly, to reinvent ourselves, to be flexible, to not get too attached to anything, to never think we've made it. Flexibility is presented as a virtue, and in part, it can be. But when it becomes a permanent condition, it starts to look a lot like insecurity. Because what is liquid does not support. It flows, it slips away, it changes container, and in the long run, it forces us to change shape along with it. This liquidity also enters our emotional relationships. Love, friendship, desire, even family, are increasingly shaped by the logic of the market. We choose each other the way products are chosen. We evaluate, we compare, we scroll, we like. We wait for a reply, we interpret silence. Then, if something doesn't feel right, we move on. Dating apps are only the most visible example of a much deeper change. The other person no longer appears as a mystery to encounter, but as a profile to evaluate. A photo, a bio, an age, a profession, an implicit promise of compatibility. If something doesn't feel right, it gets discarded. If something seemingly better comes along, you switch. If the relationship becomes difficult, we ask ourselves whether there isn't a simpler, lighter, more suitable option for us. The problem is not technology itself. The problem is the way we learn to look at things, a consumerist way of looking at things. The other person has to move us, complete us, stimulate us, reassure us, improve our lives, but preferably without weighing too heavily on us. So even relationships become fixed-term emotional contracts. We stay as long as it's worth it, as long as it works, as long as it produces well-being. But love doesn't work like a product. It's not always efficient. It's not always rewarding. It's not always easy to manage. Sometimes it requires waiting. Sometimes it requires effort. Sometimes it requires the ability to stay when the other person is not at their best. And a society accustomed to replacement is finding it harder and harder to understand permanence. Because staying is no longer a natural gesture. It is almost a countercultural act. The same logic enters the workplace. For decades, work was also a form of identity. It could be alienating, exhausting, unfair, but often it gave people a place in the world. Today, work is increasingly fragmented. Short-term contracts, continuous conversations, measurable goals, mandatory updates, skills to refresh, resumes to optimize, professional profiles to be curated like small, personal showcases. Knowing how to do something is no longer enough. You also have to know how to present yourself. Work is no longer just competence. It is image, availability, adaptability. The ability to always seem available. So the worker also becomes a product, a profile to be reviewed, a resource to be placed, a performance to be evaluated, a cost to be optimized. And when it's no longer needed, it's replaced. Precariousness doesn't concern the contract alone. It concerns the soul. Because if work is unstable, identity too begins to waver. Who am I if my role disappears tomorrow? How much am I worth if no one selects me? How much can I afford to be fragile in a world that rewards, above all, those who appear efficient? Contemporary society tells us, be the entrepreneur of yourself. It's a seductive formula. It seems to promise autonomy, freedom, and the possibility of self-expression. But it also hides a sentence. Because if you are a business, you must always grow. You have to improve. You have to compete. You have to sell yourself. And if you fail, the blame seems to fall entirely on you. We live immersed in a culture of performance. Everything seems to have to produce a result. The body has to be fit. The mind has to be productive. Free time has to be optimized. Relationships have to be fulfilling. Your social profile has to be interesting. Even well-being becomes a performance. You have to meditate, work out, eat well, read, sleep better. Be present, being centered, being disciplined. These are all potentially good things. The problem arises when every gesture becomes an indicator of your worth. At that point, even self-care turns into anxiety. We no longer truly rest. We recover energy so we can go back to being productive. We no longer work out just to feel good. Often we work out to prove control. We no longer learn just out of curiosity. We learn to stay competitive. The silent question that accompanies us is always the same. Am I enough? Smart enough? Attractive enough? Up-to-date enough? Productive enough? Interesting enough? Strong enough? Marketable enough? The tragedy is that the answer always seems to be no, because the market never says, enough now, you're sufficient. The market says, you can still improve. And it is precisely this endless promise of improvement that often keeps us trapped. In this scenario, the great trap of personal branding is born. At first, it seems like a form of freedom. Tell who you are, build your image, find your voice, show your value, get yourself known. But slowly, something happens. You no longer tell who you are. You start becoming what works. You choose the words that perform best. You showcase the most marketable sides. You hide the opaque areas. You turn experiences into content, skills into slogans, fragilities into storytelling, ideas into positioning. Even pain can become promotional material. Even vulnerability can become strategy. Even authenticity, if it is measured, packaged, and repeated enough times, can turn into a pose. Personal branding promises to free us from anonymity, but it risks trapping us in a marketable version of ourselves. A clean version, consistent, optimized, easy to understand, easy to sell. The problem is that a human being is not as consistent as a brand. A human being changes their mind. They have contradictions. They have useless days. They have desires they can't explain. But the brand doesn't like disorder. The brand wants clarity. It wants recognizability. He wants continuity. He wants a promise that will be kept. So, by constantly building our image, we risk losing our inner selves. We become the packaging of ourselves. The deepest consequence is that we begin to live as if we were always under evaluation. At work, in love, in friendships, on social media. Even in the way we talk about ourselves, every space becomes a showcase. Every encounter can seem like a selection process. Every silence risks becoming a rejection. Every comparison, sooner or later, starts to look like a ranking. And so we learn to change ourselves. We cut away the less presentable parts. We hide our hesitations. We soften uncomfortable ideas. We make our image more appealing. We don't just want to be loved, we want to be chosen. And in a consumer society, being chosen often means being preferred over someone else. This is where an invisible, ongoing competition begins. It's not enough to be a good person. We need to be more interesting, more desirable, more brilliant, more suited to the emotional and social market we find ourselves in. But if we are products, then we can also be discarded. And that possibility follows us everywhere, in the fear of not getting a response, in the anxiety before an interview, in the need to check the views, in the sadness after an ignored message. Consumer society has not only taught us to buy objects, it has taught us to see ourselves as objects. And when you start looking at yourself like this, every flaw seems like a market flaw, something to fix before anyone notices. Bauman had sensed something essential. Liquid modernity does not destroy the desire for connection. It makes it more contradictory. We want deep relationships, but we're afraid of depending on someone. We want to be loved, but we fear losing our freedom. We want stability, but we're drawn to the idea of always having other possibilities. We want to be chosen, but we don't want to feel bound by the choice. So we remain suspended. We long for solidity, but we've been taught to replace. We want someone who stays, but often we no longer know how to stay. And perhaps this is precisely one of the deepest wounds of our time, not loneliness itself, but the inability to trust without feeling like you're losing something. In a society where everything must remain reversible, even love becomes dangerous. Because to love means to make yourself vulnerable. It means not controlling everything. It means accepting that the other person was not made to satisfy us. It means encountering a presence, not consuming an experience. So what can we do? Maybe the answer is not to leave the market. That would be naive. We live within this society. We need to work, to present ourselves, to communicate, to choose, to be chosen. But we can at least regain a different perspective. We can remember that a person is not the same as their profile, that a relationship is not a service, that the value of a human being does not depend on their immediate desirability, that not everything that matters has to be useful, monetizable, showcaseable, or high-performing. We can stop at least every now and then asking ourselves how to appear, and go back to asking ourselves how to live. We can protect areas of our lives that should not become a content. Unshown friendships, unpublished thoughts, unoptimized days. Maybe today one of the most radical forms of resistance is precisely this: not making everything sellable, not turning every vulnerability into strategy, not turning every experience into a resume, not turning every bond into performance, not turning ourselves into a perfectly packaged product. Because what we truly are is not on the shelf. It lies in the less marketable parts, in doubts, in difficult loyalties, in silences, in the things we do without needing to show them, in relationships that don't work like a purchase, but like a promise. And perhaps, in a world that wants us liquid, replaceable, and always available, becoming a little less sellable could be the first gesture of freedom. Not to disappear, but to return, slowly, to being people. If this video made you think of an experience you've had, you can write it in the comments. Not to turn it into content, but to remind us that behind the profiles, the roles, and the images we show, there are still real people. If you want to keep reflecting on philosophy, society, and contemporary life, you can subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.